So we're back in the Agriland tent here for our dairy panel discussion, and with me now is Joe Patton from Teagasc, Siobhan Ring, ICBF, and dairy farmer Eoin Brody from County Cavan. So dairy farmers are finding it increasingly difficult to sell bull calves. Last year we saw dairy farmers giving them away for nothing. There was calves even left behind in marts in areas. Do you expect, I suppose this question is to Joe, maybe the same to happen in 2020 or...
For the spring of 2020?
The spring of 2020.
Well, look at Emma, being realistic about it, all the signs would be that would be the case. I think certainly from a Teagasc perspective, it's something that we have been trying to warn our dairy farmers about to a fair degree. I think perhaps the idea of maybe calves being a little bit more saleable if they're a little bit older is something we've been talking about quite a bit. So maybe our messages for our dairy farmers at least has been around auditing space on the farm and making sure that we can handle calves for a few weeks older, because, you know, talking to a lot of our own discussion group members, they will say that while it's difficult to shift calves at a very young age, it does get a bit easier as calves get a little bit older. So perhaps there's some adjustment there needed in terms of the model of how old or how young a calf is at the age of for sale, you know? Yeah.
You know, like facilities on dairy farms are under pressure enough nearly without farmers having to think about more facilities for their calves to keep them for 3 weeks and 4 weeks, and they're so busy that time of year.
Absolutely.
Having 90% in 6 weeks. Like, I don't know if farmers are going to have to, are they prepared to keep them for another 4 weeks? Like, should maybe something else be in place? Like, what about like subsidising beef farmers to take calves, or like is a bobby calf industry on the cards?
Yeah, I think that we need to be just a bit careful about what it means for the extra numbers, and we have kind of modelled that out and looked at that. Let's say for your standard, even a reasonable scale, maybe 100, 140, 150 cows, keeping calves for an extra couple of weeks at the peak period, and it's only for a peak couple of weeks, it's until you get your first crop gone, if you like. It equates to maybe an extra 25 to 30 calves on the farm for an extra couple of weeks at peak, if you know what I'm saying. So, I don't think we should be careful that we don't overestimate what that means, and I think people need to deal with the couple of weeks of the peak rather than being very elaborate in terms of having to spend a lot on extra facilities, maybe spending a lot perhaps on a lot of automation on calf feed. And I think space and ease of movement of milk for a few weeks is where it's at. And for a lot of dairy farms, they have made provision for additional calf space, and it probably has improved calf health for the calf population as a whole, rather than just, it has been beneficial to address that. So, while we do need to say, that's not the solution, because ultimately calves will have to be sold off farm. I think we should be prepared for perhaps a little bit older. I think more farmers that would be interested in buying calves would probably be interested in buying them when they're over that initial period, if you know what I'm saying. But as I say, we shouldn't be spending an awful lot additional to just provide a bit of extra space for that peak period. Yeah.
Eoin, for someone who is dairy farming and who's on the ground, and you are crossbreeding yourself as well, have you any preparations in place for 2020? Or do you think maybe a dairy farmer should have a bit of reassurance that if he puts this new facilities in place, are his calves actually going to be saleable in another 4 weeks' time if he puts the investment in?
I think Joe's point is very valid. We definitely need to be able to manage the calves that are born on the farm, and we need to be able to look after them in a good, humane, and make them a valuable calf. There's no point in having lots of cows calving your farm and end up not having space for them all and to be able to manage them all. Like we've seen this spring gone by, and there was a week when the shipping boats didn't travel and it put a lot of pressure on farmyards. There was another week then that people just didn't, the year before that we had unseen weather circumstances that put pressure on the farm. So I think it's a very valid point what Joe is making, that we need to have space on the farm and facilities on the farm to be able to manage them for those 2-3 week period. And it's a little extra cost, but if the calf has a value at the other end, that's benefit to all the farmers. So.
But do you think under, let's say, current beef prices that will be the case after 3 or 4 weeks, that you will be able to sell them if you keep them for that period of time?
Yeah, well, I think it's important that we have as many different markets available for us as dairy farmers to send calves to. And the more options there are, the less chance that anybody is going to be stuck into a narrow direction to produce a calf for a market that is either flooded or doesn't exist or won't give a financial return to the farmer. So there has to be different options available for the farmer to send those calves to places where the calf is worth something to the next person up the line, either rearing it on as a beef calf, rearing it on in a veal crate, or processing it on further at an early age. So.
Siobhan, you've been involved in the development of the Dairy Beef Index. That was only launched last year. How was the uptake of that then? Do you think last year was the uptake good, or was it a success from your point of view?
Yeah, so really it picks up on the points that Joe and Eoin have kind of stated. You know, the really bad spring kind of heightened the frustration of dairy farmers, and that was really seen in the uptake of the Dairy Beef Index, and that we've had a really successful initial year. So I suppose in terms of the number of serves, we've had a higher quantity of dairy beef serves. So this year, in comparison to the previous 3 years, we have about 45,000 additional dairy beef serves. And the fact that we have our Dairy Beef Index now is really good, because the Dairy Beef Index value of those calves is about €12 higher in comparison to the previous years, and it's actually the beef merit of those calves is of the additional value in comparison to the calving trait. So really, while dairy farmers would have been, I suppose, selecting for easy calving and short gestation bulls without taking any cognizance as such of the beef merit, now, because we have the Dairy Beef Index, farmers are using the beefier bulls. So I suppose the initial year has been good success in that instance. So I suppose it's just allowing farmers to say, okay, they want to use a beef bull on their cows, and they'll pay the same price for a straw. It has the same calving difficulty, both bulls, but one has a higher beef merit. Now they actually know the one that has the higher beef merit because he's the higher Dairy Beef Index value, and that should return more profit than on farm.
There's a lot of farmers out there, both dairy and beef, that think dairy farmers should stick to producing milk and beef farmers should stick to producing beef. I suppose, what's your opinion maybe on that, Joe?
Look at that, I think we have to be a bit careful around that, we're now in 2019, there's a sort of a 4-year correction after quotas have been abolished, and, it's not as if the cattle industry in Ireland has been, the 2015 was the last year of the cattle industry in Ireland. If you go back to the early 80s, for example, there was a very large proportion of the beef from Ireland came from the dairy herd. That was traditionally, in fact, you could argue that we're returning to the way that it always was, with a hiatus when you had your quota system in place. I think people sort of forget that dairy beef has always been a part of the industry. It probably dropped in percentage-wise when milk quotas were in and we had coupled payments for beef production, etc., etc. And there's a natural change around that. So we can't say that that dairy farmers have to stick to it. There will always be beef from the dairy herd. That's inevitable. But I think the challenge for dairy farmers is to be able to ensure that, as was said, in terms of using the Dairy Beef Index, that the quality of calf perhaps is something that offers a little potential for the next user of the calf to make a margin on it. So, the reality is that the beef from the dairy herd is going to be there. Our challenge is really how do we integrate that with and leave a margin in it for beef and dairy producers alike, rather than saying it's going to vanish, because it isn't.
I know it's well and good we want farmers to put on more beef, but for someone like Eoin who's crossbreeding, if he puts a beef bull on his crossbred cow, is that calf at the end still going to be valuable to the beef farmer?
Depends on the beef bull, doesn't it?
Yeah, well, this year I actually have gone down that road. I've used sire advice and gone any cow that was below a certain level EBI, and I found it a fantastic tool. I was able to put a Hereford AI straw on them, and I've kept all to AI. So the beef calf is going to be out of an AI straw. So half of that calf is going to be from a very good beef side. The other half of that calf is going to be likely 2/3 Frisian and 1/3 Jersey. It's going to be quite a good calf, and I've already got customers looking for them. So that's a good direction for the poorer quality calves. The other direction we need to sort out is what to do with the high quality calves that I want to keep crossbreeding to get the benefit of the milk and the kilos of milk solid. And I do know that crossbreeding has paid me well over the last 10 or 15 years, so I want to keep doing that. And how do we manage that bull calf?
Yeah.
And I think we need to keep our options open in the future, that we have different markets for that calf.
Yeah.
And sex semen probably has a journey to play in the future. It's not just there yet, but hopefully in the future it'll be a benefit. So.
Yeah.
Just maybe one point on that. I think what's very important to remember too is that if we can improve the fertility of the national dairy herd, and crossbreeding has clear benefits to that, the proportion of animals within the national dairy herd that need to be bred to dairy AI actually reduces.
Yeah.
So there's an irony there now that the most fertile herds are actually using an awful lot of beef straws. Whereas if your fertility on your dairy herd is poor, you have to use proportionally a much larger percentage of dairy AI, which does create more dairy-bred beef calves, if you know what I'm saying. So the key to improving the situation from more beef from the dairy herd is actually to improve the fertility of the national herd. And I think crossbreeding has been beneficial there.
Yeah. Less straws used and less dairy.
And most beneficial, and that puts another argument to the whole story or equation about the benefits to climate long term by crossbreeding and making sure we have that cow that lasts one lactation longer than the normal and gives more efficient use of the grass and better kilos of milk solids in terms of its live weight. So there's a big story going on. I think ICBF have a lot of good things coming up in the future that's going to be the benefit of everybody. So we're looking forward to working together.
Because long term we really need to be thinking about the environment first and foremost. Well, that's great. Thank you very much for joining me.
Thanks for having us.
Enjoy the rest of the plan.
Cool. Thank you.